A poor mechanic fixed more than her wheelchair. He gave her hope, joy, and a miracle her family never expected. The garage smelled of oil, metal, and gasoline, a scent the mechanic had long associated with purpose. His hands were streaked with grime, the tiny scars from years of tinkering and fixing things that everyone else had given up on. At 25, he worked tirelessly in this small, dimly lit space tucked between cracked concrete buildings, a world away from the glittering glass towers and manicured lawns of the city's wealthy elite. Yet there was pride in his work. The smooth whir of a wrench, the subtle resistance of a bolt loosening just so, the rhythmic clank of tools across the workbench. Each day he mended what was broken, not for recognition, but because he knew that sometimes the simplest fixes could change lives. He wiped his hands on a rag, pausing to listen to the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent and fast-paced, but here time felt slower, deliberate. He liked it that way. There was a quiet honesty to his life, a tangible weight to his efforts, even if they were unnoticed by anyone beyond the garage walls. That morning, he had no idea that his ordinary day was about to intersect with a world he'd only glimpsed from afar. A sleek black car rolled up, the kind he'd seen only in magazines and behind velvet ropes. The engine purred softly as it stopped in front of the garage. A door opened, and a woman stepped out. A striking figure, graceful and composed, with subtle elegance in the way she moved. Her posture spoke of confidence born from experience. Yet there was a delicate vulnerability in the way she glanced at her daughter, seated in a wheelchair beside her. For a moment, the mechanic simply watched, unsure whether to step forward or remain hidden behind the hood of a car he was working on. Something about the child caught his attention first. Her eyes, bright and curious, scanned the workshop with equal parts wonder and hesitation. Her fingers lightly traced the wheelchair armrests as though testing the world, measuring it for safety. The mechanic felt a subtle tug in his chest, a mixture of protectiveness and admiration. He stepped forward, greeting them with a natural warmth that required no polish or pretense. "Good morning. Can I help you?" His voice was steady, even if his heart beat a little faster. There was something about the juxtaposition. His simple attire, his rough hands, and their pristine presence, that made him acutely aware of how different their worlds were. And yet, in that moment, none of it seemed to matter. The child smiled faintly, a gesture so small it might have been missed by anyone else. But to him, it was an invitation. Her smile sparked a quiet hope, a hint that even across the gap between wealth and modesty, connection was possible. The mother's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary, a mixture of curiosity and cautious trust. In that small, unremarkable garage, with the smell of oil and metal heavy in the air, two worlds were about to collide. A humble mechanic with hands made for fixing, a young girl with dreams constrained by circumstance, and a mother whose heart had seen both privilege and worry. Soon, all would find their lives intertwined in ways none of them could yet imagine. And for the first time that day, the mechanic felt the stirring of something beyond bolts and engines, a quiet anticipation that maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference far greater than he ever had before. The bell above the garage door jingled softly as they entered, a sound so ordinary that it barely disturbed the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. And yet, in that simple chime, the mechanic felt a shift, a subtle ripple in the calm rhythm of his day. He looked up from the car he was repairing, grease still streaking his palms, and saw them, a woman and her daughter. The contrast was immediate. The mother moved with quiet authority, each step measured and graceful, yet her eyes held a trace of concern. The daughter, smaller in frame, relied on a wheelchair, her movements cautious but deliberate. For a brief moment, the mechanic hesitated, unsure how to bridge the space between his rugged, oil-stained world and theirs. But instinct took over. He stepped forward, offering a warm, steady smile. "Good morning. What brings you here?" His voice was calm, unhurried, but carried an honesty that immediately put them at ease. The daughter looked up, her eyes wide and curious, lingering on him as though trying to gauge whether he was safe, kind, There was a fragile strength in her gaze, a resilience shaped by limitations she had learned to navigate. She shifted slightly in her chair, and the mechanic instinctively moved closer, just enough to be helpful without intruding. As he approached, the daughter's hand brushed against a small lever on her wheelchair, hesitating as if testing the world for its response. He crouched slightly, level with her, and gently adjusted the seat cushion so she could sit more comfortably. His fingers brushed hers for a fleeting moment, a spark of connection that neither of them could ignore. She gave a tentative smile, and in that instant, the distance between their worlds softened. The mother watched silently, her hands clasped together. There was a tension in her posture, a protective caution, but also a quiet curiosity. The mechanic sensed it immediately. He spoke softly, careful not to overstep. "I want to make sure she's comfortable. If there's anything I can do, please let me know." His words were simple, but they carried a weight of sincerity. The daughter's eyes lit up, a brief, unguarded moment of trust. I like the way your hands move," she said softly, surprising herself as much as him. She meant the way he worked, precise and deliberate, yet her words held a deeper meaning. She saw care and attention in his movements, not just skill. He chuckled lightly, the sound warm and human. "Then I'll keep my hands moving the right way," he replied, and for a moment, the workshop felt suspended in time. The smell of oil and metal faded into the background, replaced by the quiet intimacy of shared understanding. A soft breeze drifted in through the open garage door, ruffling the daughter's hair. The mechanic reached out instinctively, tucking a loose strand behind her ear. His touch was brief but gentle, a silent reassurance. She looked at him, eyes wide, and for the first time in years, he thought he saw something like hope reflected back at him. In that first encounter, no words were needed to establish trust, empathy, or the faint stirrings of emotional connection. A simple touch, a careful glance, a shared smile, enough to set the stage for the bond that would grow slowly, painfully beautiful, and utterly transformative. Over the next few weeks, the daughter returned to the garage regularly, sometimes accompanied by her mother, other times on her own. Each visit became a small ritual, a quiet intrusion into the mechanic's otherwise predictable days. The first few encounters were tentative, polite smiles and brief words exchanged over the hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft clanking of tools. But gradually, as trust grew, the conversations deepened, carried by a kind of unspoken rhythm that only develops when two people start to understand each other without pressure or pretense. The daughter would watch him work, her gaze following the precise movements of his hands as he tightened bolts or polished metal. There was a fascination in her eyes, not just with the machines, but with the calm, deliberate care in his work. She began to ask questions, small ones at first. "Why do you always tighten it this way?" Or, "Does it hurt when you make a mistake?" Each revealing her curiosity about the world beyond her own. And with every question, he answered patiently, explaining not only how but why, sharing glimpses of his life, his frustrations, and the little triumphs that came from fixing what others had abandoned. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the high windows, creating a lattice of golden squares across the garage floor, the daughter hesitated before asking something more personal. "Do you ever feel lonely?" she murmured. He paused, wiping his hands on a rag, and looked at her. The question struck him with its quiet honesty. He could have brushed it off, but something in her eyes, honest, unguarded, and quietly vulnerable, made him speak from the heart. "I do," he admitted softly. "But it's not always a bad thing. Loneliness teaches you patience. It teaches you to notice small things, like how a bolt fits perfectly, or how someone smiles when they feel understood." His words hung in the air, carrying a warmth that wasn't forced, just human. She nodded slowly, her fingers brushing the armrest of her wheelchair as if weighing his words. Their connection deepened through these moments of shared vulnerability. He remembered the little things she mentioned, the soft hum of her favorite music, her love for books that described worlds she could only dream of exploring, her quiet longing to move freely. He began to leave small notes or adjustments in her wheelchair, A cushion fixed, a wheel oiled for smoother movement, reminders of her potential beyond limitations. She noticed, she appreciated, and in response, she shared small smiles, fleeting touches on his hand, and the first real laughter she had felt in months. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the garage was bathed in orange and gold, she leaned slightly forward, resting her cheek against the back of her wheelchair and sighed. "I feel lighter here. With you." The mechanic crouched beside her, placing a hand gently on hers, feeling the subtle warmth of her skin. He didn't speak, no words were needed. The silence itself was full of understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that trust had been earned, and that their bond was no longer just about fixing machines. It was about recognizing each other's humanity, fragility, and hope. In these quiet, unhurried exchanges, emotional intimacy flourished. Each touch, glance, and carefully chosen word layered their relationship with trust, care, and anticipation for what might grow between them. The bond wasn't forced. It was natural, arising from respect and shared vulnerability. And slowly, imperceptibly, the garage, once just a place of work, became a sanctuary where connection, hope, and subtle warmth could quietly bloom. It had been months since the daughter had first come to the garage, and in that time, a subtle transformation had begun, not only in her confidence, but in the quiet understanding that the mechanic cared deeply for her well-being. He had listened, observed, and slowly learned the nuances of her needs. The way her wheelchair sometimes resisted her movements, the areas of discomfort that no cushion could entirely ease, the small frustrations that made independence feel fleeting. One crisp morning, as golden sunlight spilled through the garage windows, he called her mother and daughter in with a gentle wave. "I think I've got something for her," he said, his voice steady, but with a trace of anticipation. The daughter looked at him curiously, her eyes wide with cautious hope, while her mother, protective but trusting, followed close behind. He guided the wheelchair to the center of the garage. For the next hour, he demonstrated the improvements he had meticulously worked on. A custom adjustment to the chair's mechanics that allowed smoother movement, a modified control system tailored to her hand strength, and a cushion molded perfectly to her frame. Each adjustment had been painstakingly designed with care, using every bit of knowledge and skill he possessed. "Try it," he said softly, stepping back. She hesitated for only a moment before placing her hands on the controls. The first movement was tentative, a small forward glide. Then, with a mix of awe and delight, she found herself moving effortlessly across the floor. The wheelchair responded as if it were an extension of her own body, carrying her smoothly over the bumps and gaps she had always dreaded. Her laughter rang out, bright and clear, bouncing off the walls of the garage. It was a sound so full of joy that the mechanic felt warmth rise to his chest, a quiet pride that made the grease-streaked hands in his lap feel like instruments of something extraordinary. The mother's reaction was immediate. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling freely as she clutched his shoulders, her gratitude unspoken but palpable. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her face pressed briefly to his chest in an embrace that carried years of fear, worry, and hope finally released. The daughter spun in gentle arcs, the control smooth under her fingers. She looked at him with unguarded amazement, her eyes shining. "I can move. I can really move." Her voice carried disbelief mixed with triumph. The mechanic knelt beside her, adjusting a small lever to fine-tune the balance, and in that moment, their hands brushed lightly. A touch that was electric in its simplicity, filled with empathy, care, and the thrill of shared triumph. The mother's sobs softened into quiet laughter, a mixture of relief and joy. She rested a hand on his arm, lingering there longer than expected, as if grounding herself in the reality that someone so kind, so devoted, existed in their world. The garage, once just a place of work, was now a sanctuary of miracle and hope. The sun slanted across the floor, illuminating the three of them in a warm glow, and for the first time, the daughter felt the sweet freedom of movement she had longed for. The mother felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, and the mechanic felt the quiet, profound satisfaction of changing lives in the simplest yet most meaningful way. This was more than a repair. It was a miracle born of patience, care, and a heart willing to see what others overlooked. And in that garage, amidst the scent of oil and sunlight, the first threads of emotional intimacy between all three of them grew stronger, subtle but unbreakable, setting the stage for connections that would deepen in ways no one could have predicted. After the miracle in the garage, the atmosphere between the mechanic and the mother subtly shifted. Gratitude had softened the edges of formality, and small gestures, once purely polite, now carried weight, loaded with unspoken acknowledgement. Every visit became a quiet negotiation of proximity, a delicate dance where eyes lingered just a moment too long, and touches, brief and casual, spoke louder than words ever could. It began in small ways. One afternoon, as the mother leaned over to adjust her daughter's blanket, her hand brushed against the mechanic's. Neither pulled away immediately. The warmth of her fingers on his skin lingered, subtle yet electrifying. His chest felt tight, not from exertion, but from the sudden awareness of her nearness. He stepped back slightly, but caught himself, allowing the contact to last a heartbeat longer than strictly necessary. The daughter, absorbed in a book, didn't notice, but the mother's cheeks colored faintly, her gaze flicking away for a fraction of a second before returning. They began to talk more often when her daughter was occupied, lingering in corners of the garage or on the small patio outside. Conversations that started as logistical, plans for her daughter, repairs, schedules, slowly became personal. She spoke of her childhood, the pressures of managing a family, and the quiet exhaustion of wealth accompanied by constant expectations. He listened, his hands never idle, sometimes wiping grease from a tool or brushing a strand of hair behind his ear, but his attention was entirely hers. His responses were measured, sincere, occasionally teasing, always respectful. One evening, the sun was dipping behind the horizon, casting a golden-orange glow across the garage. The mother leaned on the counter as he handed her a cup of coffee. Their hands brushed again, this time on purpose. Neither spoke for a long moment, just feeling the warmth and weight of the connection. The air between them thickened with anticipation, a quiet longing neither dared to voice. Her perfume mingled faintly with the smell of engine oil, a strange, oddly comforting combination, and he found himself inhaling just a little longer, noticing how ordinary moments suddenly felt intimate. Their eyes met more frequently now, lingering glances that carried layered meaning. Admiration, curiosity, and a growing sense of emotional closeness. When he laughed at one of her stories, he noticed the way her shoulders relaxed, the tension in her jaw softening. She began leaning slightly closer when they spoke, the brush of her sleeve or a stray lock of hair occasionally grazing his arm. Each touch was innocent, yet it left a subtle heat that neither could ignore. Yet, with every moment, hesitation shadowed them. He feared the chasm between their lives, imagining the social judgment or her possible doubts. She, confident yet quietly vulnerable, wondered whether indulging the warmth of his presence might blur boundaries she had long maintained. And so, their attraction existed in silence. A delicate, unspoken current that swirled beneath shared laughter, casual touches, and the quiet rhythm of companionship. By the end of that evening, the garage felt transformed. It was no longer just a place for repairing machines. It had become a space where trust, admiration, and subtle desire intertwined. Every glance, every accidental touch, every shared smile built a slow, simmering tension. A romance forming quietly but inevitably, its pace measured and deliberate, just like the mechanic's careful hands. The quiet rhythm of their budding connection was suddenly disrupted by the weight of the world outside the garage. One afternoon, as the daughter played quietly nearby, a subtle tension crept into the air. The mother's sister had visited, bringing with her sharp eyes and sharper opinions. "You trust him too much," she whispered, glancing at the mechanic with thinly veiled skepticism. "He's, well, from another world entirely. What do you expect? That he'll understand our life, our responsibilities?" The words, though quiet, struck the mother like a sudden gust of wind. She looked at the mechanic. His hands still greasy from a recent repair, his clothes simple, his smile warm but cautious. The contrast between him and her world, which had always been orderly and carefully curated, became impossible to ignore. And yet, her heart resisted the practicality of doubt. She had seen his patience, his care, the small, profound ways he had touched her daughter's life. How could she reconcile that with the world's judgment? Later, as the visitor left, the mother found herself lingering near the garage, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. She was quiet, her thoughts heavy. The mechanic noticed immediately. He approached slowly, giving her space but signaling presence. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. The warmth in his tone cut through the fog of anxiety. She hesitated, looking away for a moment before allowing herself to be vulnerable. I worry," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper, "about what people will think about us and whether this is foolish." Her eyes searched his, full of conflict. "I don't want to hurt anyone, but I can't deny what I feel." He knelt slightly, careful not to overstep, and placed a gentle hand over hers. The touch was grounding, a quiet reassurance that transcended words. "I don't care about the world," he said softly, sincerity threading every syllable. "I care about her, and I care about you. That's what matters here." His palm was warm, steady. The subtle pressure of his thumb brushing hers communicated patience, understanding, and support. The mother drew a slow breath, letting the comfort of his presence anchor her. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension in her jaw softening. She realized that the societal gap, the wealth, the whispered doubts, it all felt distant when he was near. Yet the fear remained, subtle but persistent, like a shadow that refused to fade. They sat together quietly, sharing the silence, broken only by the soft hum of the garage machinery and the occasional laugh of her daughter. Each sound, each glance, strengthened the unspoken trust between them. The mechanic's quiet patience allowed her to acknowledge her own vulnerability without judgment, and the mother's honesty deepened the emotional intimacy between them. In that moment, they both understood that love, real, slow-burning, patient love, was not only about shared moments of joy, but about facing uncertainty, confronting doubt, and holding steady in each other's presence. The connection between them had been tested not by grand gestures, but by the subtle pressures of reality. And for the first time, they both realized that their bond was strong enough to withstand scrutiny, if only they continued to trust each other and themselves. The garage was quiet that evening, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. The daughter had been zipping gently across the floor in her wheelchair, her laughter filling the space in a way that seemed almost magical. For the first time, she was moving without hesitation, her confidence radiating in every push of the wheel. The mechanic watched her with a quiet pride, a small smile tugging at his lips, his heart full in a way he hadn't anticipated. Her mother stood nearby, her hands loosely clasped, watching the scene unfold. There were tears in her eyes, not the trembling, anxious kind from before, but the steady, unrestrained tears of someone witnessing a miracle, the culmination of hope, trust, and unexpected care. She stepped forward slowly, as if unsure of whether her feet could carry her the right way. When she reached the mechanic, she rested her hands on his shoulders, the warmth of her touch lingering longer than necessary. I don't have the words," she whispered, her voice trembling but sincere. "Thank you for giving her this, for everything." He smiled softly, feeling the subtle pressure of her hands against his arms. "You don't need words," he said. "Seeing her like this, that's enough." His own voice carried a quiet reverence, a sincerity that didn't require flourish. The daughter wheeled closer, her small hands reaching for his. "Thank you," she said simply, her eyes shining with joy. She squeezed his hand lightly, her grip conveying more than words could: gratitude, trust, and a quiet admiration for the man who had changed her world. The gesture sent a warmth through him that was almost painful in its sweetness. He lowered himself slightly to meet her gaze, returning the squeeze with gentle firmness. There was a stillness then, a shared pause in the garage where the sun's last rays spilled over them. The mother drew a slow breath, resting a hand on the mechanic's arm, and for a fleeting moment, the social differences, the fears, the doubts, all of it melted away. What remained was pure human connection. Gratitude, affection, and a tentative, budding love. "Seeing him happy makes me happy," the mother said softly, almost to herself, her eyes reflecting the golden light. "And seeing you happy?" She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. The subtle tension, the unspoken attraction between them, no longer needed to hide. It was acknowledged in glances that lingered, in fingers brushing, in the quiet comfort of proximity. For a while, the three of them simply existed in that space together. The garage, once a place of work and oil-streaked tools, had transformed into a sanctuary of shared trust, love, and accomplishment. The daughter's laughter echoed, the mother's quiet gratitude lingered, and the mechanic felt the profound satisfaction of not just fixing machines, but touching hearts. As the sun dipped fully below the horizon, the air grew cooler, carrying with it the faint scent of engine oil mixed with the warmth of human presence. They left the garage together, walking slowly, the daughter between them, her wheelchair gliding effortlessly, her mother holding one hand and the mechanic the other. It was a quiet procession, simple, unremarkable to any passerby, but monumental in its emotional significance. In that moment, acceptance settled like a gentle blanket over them all. Gratitude, love, and quiet intimacy intertwined seamlessly. The miracle had done more than restore movement. It had woven together hearts, creating a bond that was tender, enduring, and deeply human. The story, once about difference and distance, had become a story about connection, courage, and the slow, beautiful unfolding of love. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Share it with someone who believes in miracles and the power of kindness, and let us know in the comments who in your life has made a difference in a way you'll never forget.